I've got a really full schedule coming up of teaching not only my 2-day course, but several of my 6-hour courses, and gosh, so many things coming up in the next year. I had the good fortune of being asked to come and speak in Sydney, Australia in February 2019. And that course is getting booked quite rapidly. But I wanted to do this Facebook Live, especially for my friends over in that area, because I think they have a lot of questions about why would you use ABA in feeding therapy? And what is ABA anyway? I thought that was just for working with kids with autism. So fortunately, my friends Val and Deborah, who are hosting my 2-day course in Sydney, sent me a list of questions. And I'm going to go through 4 or 5 of these, read the question, answer them, and then we're going to take your questions as well. And remember, it can be about anything that has to do with kids and picky eating, my courses, whatever you guys want to talk about. Okay, so the first question that Deb and Val sent to me was, in Australia, ABA therapy is mostly associated with behavior modification in autism spectrum disorder. Can you explain how it relates in feeding therapy for all children, not just for kids with autism? I sure can. I have a 2-day course called Feeding Therapy, It's Not Just About Swallowing. And to be honest with you, when I first started teaching it, I hesitated to put too much about ABA in the description because I think sometimes ABA gets a really bad rap and is easily misunderstood. The way that I teach applied behavior analysis when it comes to helping children who are hesitant, selective, or picky eaters is it's all about keeping it fun. It's about using the basic methods of ABA and understanding that there's an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence to everything we do, and how to shape a child's behavior so that they can become a really confident and adventurous eater. When I use ABA, it's a very gentle, soft approach. I strongly want to urge everyone out there to go to as many courses as you possibly can. My friend Christy Brackett does an amazing course all about the more of a medical aspect and ABA. My friend Diane Barr does an absolutely fabulous course about mouth development. The Talk Tools folks do a lot of work around oral placement therapy. There's so many different tools out there that we can use in feeding therapy that I hesitate to have or to hear. I hesitate when I hear that someone has just gone to one course and now they feel like they're a feeding therapist. I don't even feel like I'm an expert in this. And I go to a lot of courses. I've spent way too much money on courses this year, but I shouldn't say it that way. Money well spent. But I tend to be a little bit of a course junkie. I try to go to as many as I possibly can. You know why? Because not every kid is the same. Not every parent is the same. And definitely not every therapist is the same. So if you come to my course, one of the first things I'll say to you is, this is not the end-all be-all course. Make sure you go to as many courses as possible and get as much information as you can, and then figure out what works for you, what feels right in your heart, in your brain, and goes with your style of doing feeding therapy. For me, it's using applied behavior analysis. And the reason why is, when I was working at the hospital in Colorado, we had the good fortune of being trained by Dr. Sally Rogers, who developed the Denver model of ABA. And she wasn't necessarily teaching us about feeding therapy. She was just teaching us how to apply ABA to any sort of therapeutic treatment session. And it really changed the way I thought about the way I should work with kids. Because what ABA is it's parenting 101. It's pay attention to the desired behaviors, the good stuff, and kind of ignore the other stuff and just shape it until you get the kid doing what you need him to do so that he can thrive. That's the whole point of ABA. Deb and Val had another question for me, and they asked, therapy approaches such as SOS and Ellen Satter's division of responsibility are used frequently in feeding therapy in Australia. Can you highlight how ABA can complement those therapies? I think the biggest thing is when I have people come to my 2-day course, they often come up to me afterwards and say, I was feeling really stuck, really stuck. And getting more of a well-rounded approach and seeing how some of these ideas can actually be used in conjunction with some of those other models has been the most helpful for me. That's the most common response I get. When it comes to something like the division of responsibility, which, if, as a matter of fact, if you look, like, I can never do this, there's my books. If you look behind me, my bookshelf has all of Ellen Satter's books. I truly believe in the division of responsibility, and it's very popular here in the States, especially with registered dietitians. However, I'm getting kids who aren't yet ready for food to be put in front of them with the expectation that it's the parents' job to provide healthy food and it's their job to eat it. A lot of my kids have an extreme fear of food. They have motor challenges that don't allow them to feel safe with food in their mouth. They have GI and other physiological issues that make eating painful. My job is to get kids to a point where the division of responsibility will work for them. I love that model. But I just think the kids I see, we have to back it up a lot and do a lot of preliminary work in order to get there and be successful. I can see that Val's here too, and Val Gant is one of the hosts who's going to be hosting me in Sydney. And feel free, if any of you have taken my course, Feeding Therapy, it's not just about swallowing, my 2-day course, do me a favor, chime in. Let the folks in Australia know what you liked about it, what you found was helpful, and let them know whether you think they should come to the course. We don't have a lot of seats left, but we certainly want to fill the entire room. So we'd like to have as many people there as possible because I really don't think I'll be coming back for several more years. So this is their one and only chance. That third question that Deb and Val asked me was as follows. It's a good one. Oral motor skills play a big role in fussy eating. Can you explain how the workshop will help participants gain a better understanding of how oral motor skills can impact eating? All right, first and foremost, gotta say, this isn't an oral motor course. It's a 2-day course from evaluation to discharge, including 4 or 5 different case studies of various children using my methods of feeding therapy. However, I do have a module in the 2-day course all about tongue thrust and orofacial myology. Not to turn anybody in the audience into an orofacial myologist, because you have to take a 4-day course for that. You have to be a speech language pathologist in the United States, or there are some other qualifications in the dental arena that you could possibly take that course. And you have to take a very rigorous test and do some field work and get certified. Now, I've taken the 4-day course twice because, like I said, I'm a course junkie, but I'm not certified. And the whole reason I have a module in my course is to help to educate other therapists about the importance of understanding all of the facial muscles and how they have to be balanced and work in symmetry in order to have good oral motor function. Things like mouth breathing are a real issue. Tongue thrust, as we talked about. There's so many aspects of orofacial myology. So we're going to touch on that for about 15 to 20 minutes in my course. Plus, we're going to talk a lot about infant reflexes and how those contribute to picky eating, and how important it is that we take advantage of those reflexes and help boost skills along when we have that window of opportunity. So that's the oral motor piece that will be covered in my particular course. Let's see, Val and Deb also asked, generalization is a challenge in all feeding programs with children eating in a clinic but not at home. Can you explain how you empower therapists to help families with this challenge? Yes, great question. My favorite day of the course is day 2, because we go through very specific strategies in the first 2 hours of that day, how to generalize what we're working on in the clinic or in feeding therapy in the home. I go into people's homes, and how we generalize it to dinner time, the school cafeteria, and other environments. Most importantly, how we get out of this trap of where parents come to you as a therapist and say, he'll do it for you in the clinic, but he won't do it for me at home. That doesn't do us any good. We want these kids to be able to generalize, and I have a very step-by-step method that I can't share here. It'll take over an hour on how to do that. So I'm really hoping that that will be something that's very, very helpful to anyone attending. That's usually the feedback I get, is that's kind of the favorite part. And then finally, we have a great final question here, and make sure you're typing in your questions so that I can answer those as well. Val and Deb ask, tongue ties are very controversial in Australia, and what are your thoughts? Well, if you go to my website, melaniepotock.com, and you search my blog for tongue tie, you'll see, I don't know, 4 or 5 different articles about how I feel about tethered oral tissues. In my 2-day course, I teach an extra 1.5 hours to 2 hours on lip ties and tongue ties and directly how they impact feeding development. I have to tell you that just about 20 minutes ago, I got the most amazing email from a young gal who is in her clinical fellowship year. She hasn't yet gotten her C's. So that's that final year of education for speech language pathologists before we become certified. And she attended my 1-day course, which is kind of a mini version of the 2-day course, in New York this weekend. This past weekend, I just got home from teaching in New York City. And this very nice email came my way just 20 minutes ago, and I thought, this is the perfect answer to Val and Deb's question about tongue tie and lip tie, and why I think it's so important to educate professionals about how this impacts kids and their feeding skills. So this young woman wrote, I am a speech language pathologist currently completing my clinical fellowship year. She tells me where she works. I'll keep that confidential. During your presentation of the topic of tongue tie, it truly struck me. This was a topic I was briefly introduced to in graduate school, but I've not had any personal experiences with until now. Your explanation of the different severities of tongue ties, how it can affect tongue tip sounds, and how it may be a contributing factor to feeding, swallowing, and drooling problems had alarm bells go off in my head. I have been stumped recently on one particular client. She's extremely bright and competent. Unfortunately, she has many oral motor difficulties, including the inability to lateralize her tongue, as well as the inability to avert her tongue to the palate. With what I learned from your conference and the provided resources, I could not wait to arrive at work this morning. I reassessed her by modeling how you demonstrated to maneuver the tongue, and to my suspicion, it was extremely difficult to move that tongue. I could barely move her tongue upward toward the palate, and definitely not from side to side. When I asked her to copy my model of tongue to palate, that looks like this, you guys. When I asked her to copy that, let's see, she had much difficulty doing so. I called my supervisor, and she graciously came later on in the day and reassured me that my suspicion was correct. I later talked to her mother, explained what my role was in this, and Asha's statement on that. I'm paraphrasing a little bit to save you some time. And I just felt like this was such a great learning opportunity for me, both as a CF, but also I've discovered something clinical, and that in relaying that information to a parent, I've really made a difference. I couldn't believe it. I got that email just before I was getting ready for this Facebook Live, and I hope that explains to you just why I think it's so important that I share my knowledge of tongue tie and lip tie, and specifically how it relates to feeding. One of the things I shared with the audience in New York City is I definitely don't think every kid should be released. I think I tend to be a little bit more cautious than most people who are referring for this. And I think it's just because even though I feel fairly experienced in this, I know there's so much more to learn. So those kids who are very, very obvious that they're tied, like this CF was discussing in her little client, like just, oh my gosh, that kid can't move her tongue. Those kids I'm referring to see if their ENT or pediatric dentist feels it's necessary to release. I can talk about feeding function. I can't recommend whether someone should have a release. That's not in our scope of practice. But I can talk about how that tongue being restricted is impacting that child's ability to eat. So those kids that are pretty obvious, those are the easy ones for me. It's the ones in the gray area that I think are really challenging. And we're going to be talking a lot about that in this 2-day course to help providers make that decision. And also how to talk to other professionals like the ENTs, like the dentists or the pediatricians who say, I think tongue ties are just a fad. The kid seems to eat just fine. I don't get it. How to have a professional conversation that doesn't throw anybody under the bus, but educates other professionals so that everyone can be on the same page as to what might help this child.